This is Who Makes a Podcast? Conversations with your favorite podcast hosts about who they are, the shows they make, and why they make them. I'm your host, Chris Cookley, and my guest today is James Blatch. James is the co-presenter of the podcast The Self-Publishing Show and a historical military thriller author. He is a former BBC News presenter and reporter. James, welcome to Who Makes a Podcast.
Hi, Chris. Thank you very much indeed for having me.
For my listeners who may not know, could you tell me a little bit about yourself and where you're from originally, maybe what you do beyond podcasting, if anything, where you live, how you got there, anything like that?
Sure. Yeah, I've quite a varied background. I seem to have changed careers fairly majorly about every 10 years of my life. But I live in Huntingdon in the UK, which is a town, sort of market town, about 65 miles north of London. So a bit of a commuter zone as well. It's about an hour on the train into London. In fact, I'm going there for dinner tonight. So we're not quite in the suburbs, but we're in the sort of the sphere of influence of London in southern England. In terms of me, so I didn't get off to the best of starts, didn't do very well at school, fell into computing, which I did for 8 years. And whilst I quite enjoyed the coding side of things, I found it all very tedious otherwise and really wanted to work in broadcasting. Finally sort of woke up and started working harder in my 20s, worked myself into the BBC, which is obviously our national broadcaster here in the UK, and moved from programs, sort of producing radio programs, to journalism, and became a television news reporter and presenter. In fact, I presented the news here in the UK for a bit, but mainly I was a reporter specialising on military matters, which I loved doing. So went off around the world with the armed forces, and I did that for about 15 years, 15, wow. 16, 17, something like that, with all the sort of freelance work I did beforehand to try and get a staff job. That probably added up to about 16, 17 years with a bit of crossover with my computing world. And then I just sort of got to the point, I had children, and going off, Iraq was really a pretty unpleasant place at that time, and I was on the rotation to go to Baghdad. I'd never been to Baghdad. I've been to southern Iraq, and it sort of, was it a conscious decision or not, I don't know, but there was a part of me thought, you go to this building heavily defended in actually I think it might have been Basra, and you stand on the roof occasionally when there's rockets coming down, and you do a report which is fed to you from London. And I just thought, with young children, I sort of didn't fancy it at that stage. So I looked around for something else to do, and there was an attachment offered for a year to go off and be a film classifier, where you sit and watch films and give them their ratings, same as the MPAA does in the States, called the BBFC. And I applied for that. I was told, actually, after I applied, that 1,200 people had applied for these 6 jobs. And but I think with my BBC background, I stood out a little bit and got through the various rounds of watching films, being quizzed about it, writing reports, and anyway, was offered the job. Took that, and after a year I didn't want to go back to the BBC. I just really enjoyed it. I knew that I sort of moved on a bit, so I ended up doing 7 years of that, of watching films and TV programs and series, giving them classifications, and during that time I met 2 colleagues who were also film examiners, John Dyer and Mark Dawson, and we started sort of working together whilst we were there, particularly me and John doing video production work. And so when it came time to leave, you're only supposed to do that job for 5 years, actually, but they extended me for a couple. But after 7 years, I left, and John and I started a video production company where I used my kind of old BBC producing skills, and we worked in the corporate sector, particularly pharmaceutical. And then Mark Dawson, at the same time, had discovered self-publishing, and he was always this frustrated author. So he started doing really well with that, and we kept in touch, and he phoned me one day and said, look, I'm thinking about doing an online course to teach other authors, which I thought sounded really cool, and it was an exciting new area. So John and I had a coffee with him, and we created the self-publishing formula on the back of an envelope in London in 2015. And started SPF. And so since then, that's been my main focus, has been publishing and self-publishing. And I've written my own novel. I'm just finished the first draft of my second novel. I publish in a small imprint called Fuse Books. I publish 4 other authors, and that's growing. And we do these online courses to help authors who want to self-publish how to sell their books. So yeah, that's So I was a bit long-winded, but that's my background.
Yeah, that's an extensive background for sure.
Yeah.
Did you have any close calls while you were overseas doing the war correspondence reporting?
No, I didn't. I was too junior when all the big things happened. So it was like 2003, the big invasion. I was too junior. So there's a first wave of people who go out and they get all the prime embeds, we used to call them. So they go with the Marines or... aviation was more my thing, so I would have been with the RAF. I did get sent to Kosovo, and that would have been somewhere where I may have seen some action had it not been the fact that I really was an RAF, an aviation guy. So they sent me to the RAF airfield, and if you know anything about the way the RAF and the USAF fight their wars, they fight them usually 500 miles away from the war zone.
Sure.
in a 4-star hotel. So we were in a place called Gioia del Colle in southern Italy. I was eating mozzarella and tomatoes in the evening and reporting on the Harriers going off during the day, whilst I had colleagues who are in horrible convoys, going through Albania trying to get into Kosovo. And so that wasn't, I could not call that. They had close calls, the pilots, going off during the day, but I didn't. I spent probably a month on aircraft carriers, one way and another, and they launched from there, but again, hundreds of miles from the war zone. So, I've got no war wounds, and I'm quite pleased about that, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a cush position to be in, I guess, if you're going to be reporting on the war.
Yeah, and definitely, if you're, there's a brilliant book actually by a young British journalist for the Times newspaper, and it's called War Reporting for Cowards. And he did get an embed with the US Marines, and honestly, it was such a culture shock for him, and he was terrified.
Yeah.
He was curled up on the bottom of these transports, and the Marines were laughing the whole time. He made some good friends there, and it was a hell of an experience. But I think I would have been probably closer to that than the guy who was standing out there brazenly, broadcasting as the shots came in, like a few of the slightly psychopathic war reporters want to be.
This may be a strange question. Did you feel like you were missing out on anything at the time?
Yeah. What do you mean, missing out on the war side of things? Yes.
I mean, you hear the stories about soldiers in particular who maybe, especially in World War II, I'm thinking that's like my frame of reference, where they get maybe drafted or they get brought in and then they never see any action, and it's almost a depressing thing for them because they wanted to fight.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I was desperate to be in the action. I was bending everyone's ear about it and working my way up, and that I was getting closer to it. But yeah, I would have absolutely have gone to any embed whatsoever. I really wanted to be on an American aircraft carrier in the Gulf, which was much more active than when we were in the Mediterranean, where you can also fly from there to the Middle East, which is a lot easier. But I was desperate to get closer to the action. I really wanted to fly, actually. There's a famous American broadcaster who flew with the RAF in Lancasters and reported, and they crossed into Germany, dropped their bombs. It was a hell of a thing, really, because they went down so often. They had like a 50% attrition rate. But he very bravely went with them. And I felt that we could have got a 2-seat Harrier up, which I'd flown in a Harrier before in peacetime in the UK. So I had the kind of clearances. And the Harrier guys were quite interested in that, but it got stamped on at quite a senior level in London. And also the way the BBC works is such a hierarchy, such a large organisation, that I can well imagine that had the RAF and the MOD and Department of Defence in the UK said yes, that they would have what we call big-footed me.
Found somebody else.
Yeah, a more well-known correspondent would have come in to do it. So that would have been frustrating. So you can sort of see why I got to the end of that. It's endless politics in that world. You constantly have to talk yourself up. You've got to be good at making. And I hated all that aspect of it. I loved the work, but I was kind of done at that point.
Yeah, I could imagine. The radio programs that you produced, how long were you doing that for?
Not that long. I probably did 18 months, 2 years. I produced a guy called Steve Summers, who was quite a musical guy, and he had an afternoon show on a regional radio station, and we were quite silly and wacky, and it was a world away from the harder news that I ended up doing. I loved it. It was fun, but yeah. So I did. But I suppose in terms of where I am now and the sort of thing that you and I do with podcasting, I did do quite a lot of the interviews in those days. I did all the production. I did the pre-interview prep, which was a bit more than we do with podcasting. But my main interview experience came as a news reporter when I did interviews every day of my professional life. working there, from those simple vox pops you do out in the street where you just stop people and ask them their opinion on something, through to senior I interviewed Tony Blair, I interviewed George W. Not George W. I interviewed George H. Bush.
HW. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And who else did I interview? Yeah, quite a few cabinet ministers you wouldn't have heard of. John Major, Prime Minister, as well. So I interviewed people at the top and people who had just been sacked from their job, and parents who'd just been bereaved of their children, horrible circumstances. You name it. Anything you watch on the news in the evening that's a story, there's reporters there who carry out interviews. And that's where I cut my teeth interviewing.
The interviews that you do now must be quite an easier ordeal, I would imagine, than the ones that you had to do with those parents and politicians.
Yeah, I mean, the politicians ones I was always nervous about, because everyone listens to those, and people much more senior than me listen to them, and you do get feedback on those. And I think back slightly cringingly, one of the very early ones I did, I just didn't get it right. I let the politician not answer the question. I didn't notice he was so good. I didn't notice he wasn't answering the question, and that was pointed out to me afterwards. Well, he didn't answer your question. You didn't push him on it, and so you learn quickly on that. But
I feel like that happens constantly. Every interview I hear, almost, it seems like they ask a question, particularly in sports. I feel like they answer something, but it's never what they get asked.
Yeah. And there's all these techniques, isn't there, saying, I'm glad you've asked that, and I think what you're meaning to ask is this, and
right.
And they go off. But it was a key. When I think back to that one, we'd had it was General Motors, actually, who had a big depot north of London in a place called Luton, and they employed lots of people, and they had done for years, and they were closing the plant. It was a big shock, and the government at the day was not a very interventionist government. It was Tony Blair's government, actually, but they didn't like intervening, and the unions were basically saying to them, you have to intervene here. You've got to get on the phone to Detroit. You've got to tell them that you're going to subsidise them for 4 or 5 years just to stay here to ride this out, because we're going to lose thousands of jobs. And so that was the big question. And this guy was running from us. I mean, literally ran from us as a cabinet minister. And he came in to do an interview about something else. We tried to get him, eventually pressed his office into doing this interview. And I was sent to do it. And that was the one, it was an early one for me, an early political interview. And that's the one where I didn't properly nail him. I didn't properly spot that he wasn't answering it. So I should have, what I should have said is, look, I'm sorry, are you going to intervene or not? Really short, precise. Yeah. But I was asking it in woolly ways, and he was answering
point blank
in woolly ways. But yeah, I mean, I suppose the interviews are very different, aren't they? Because then the next day you get sent to like a murder victim's family or something like that, and that's a very, very different interview from this one. So, but the key thing amongst all of them, and I know that you're doing it already, Chris, which it's a funny thing that a lot of interviewers don't do, but you are doing it, is you listen to the answers, and so that it becomes a conversation much more than an interview. But it's surprising how often I'll be on the receiving end of a podcast interview, and you'll say something that you think's quite interesting and a little bit kind of, oh, that's interesting, and then they'll ask the next question on their sheet. Now that's an early amateurish thing that I was probably doing with that cabinet minister, a bit nervous about it. Whereas after a while, you get more confident and you start asking questions. But then it's my key tip actually for interviewing is just listen to the answers, and your questions will flow naturally from that, and that then becomes a little arc of story of the interview. So that's what I learned, I guess, the hard way.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I'm trying to work on. I read a book recently. Actually, the very first interview that I did for this podcast was Kenny McKay. He lives in the UK as well. He's from America, but he lives over there. He recommended a book called Talk to Me, which is about interviewing and how to get better answers from people. So that's been pretty beneficial as far as how I'm conducting this. I think I'm glad that it's kind of coming through. To come back to something that you said earlier, because I didn't know this, as somebody who listens to your podcast, the Self-Publishing Show, which is the podcast run by, I guess, your company, Self-Publishing Formula. You said that Mark Dawson, John Dyer, and yourself all started SPF on the back of a napkin. I didn't realize that the three of you were kind of in that together. I know Mark is kind of the face of it, and you are the voice of it, technically, I guess. I've heard John mentioned in the past. Is he kind of more behind the scenes on the podcast?
Yeah, he is actually. And so the three of us own the company together, and John tends to look after things like the website and the design. He's very good at design and the look and feel and the images. In terms of the podcast, he kind of oversees the production, so the production side of it. So I record the interviews. Obviously, I organise recording the wrap, the top and tail with Mark. But then I just park that into a Dropbox and I move on at that point to record the next interview the next day. And John takes, he makes sure that's edited and then he oversees it being put up. There's actually quite a team involved because we do it every week and we do interviews every week. That it gets uploaded all to the right places. So that's in terms of the podcast, that is John's role. And it's sort of like that for the rest of the company. He looks after the support. So students of the courses who are having problems with it or difficulty or whose payments missed or whatever, he deals with all of that side of things. And Mark and I are probably a little bit more front of house, I guess.
Yeah. And you do have a team, obviously. How many people work on your podcast? What do they do? At what point did you think it was necessary to build that team?
So it started off just me and John, and so I would record the interviews, I'd then edit them, I'd record the wraps with Mark, and we did this in quite a cumbersome way to start off with. We wanted to do it on video quite early on, so we had cameras, which really complicates it.
Yeah.
We had cameras, a separate audio recording, then I had to use my sort of editing experience to go into Final Cut Pro or Premiere Pro and put it all together. And then I think I gave it to John, who worked out they use things called Libsyn, and you'll know all about that. I know less about it and how it gets uploaded to iTunes and all the right places.
Yep.
And published onto a YouTube channel, which I think I did, and John organised the artwork. And gradually we have outsourced it. So what happens now is I'll record both the wraps and the interviews, put them in a Dropbox folder. We use Slack to coordinate this a bit, which is a sort of coordination productivity tool.
Sure.
And John Stone, who's an editor who John Dyer and I worked with when we had our video production company, who lives in the east of England, he edits it. So he will edit the interviews. As soon as I've done the interview, like I did an interview yesterday with Caroline and Suzanne, two romance authors, and John today probably or tomorrow will edit that interview and just drop it back into another Dropbox folder as an edited interview with no top and tail at that stage. That means that another person called Tom, who's another member of our team, Tom Ashford, he can look at that video and he can make some notes on what the episode's about, which helps do a brief for John Dyer to then order the title of the episode and the artwork that goes with it. And he also, funnily enough, he can brief me and Mark, because I can sometimes do an interview and it's 3 months later where we record the top and tail for it. So it's good to read a synopsis of what the interview's about, what the episode's going to be about, from Tom. And then we have two other people in the background, Catherine Matthews, who orders the transcript and makes sure the artwork's in. I think she chases that up for John. And then there's another person called Stuart. I hope you're counting all these, Chris.
Oh, yeah.
Called Stuart Grant, and Stuart actually does the technical uploading and the putting live of the episodes. So he uses Libsyn, I think it is, and he uploads it to YouTube, and he creates a sort of I think it's called a Premiere option you have on YouTube, so Premiere for when it's first played.
Puts it up in advance so people can kind of save it, like it's coming this Friday.
Yes.
Make sure you tune in.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, lots of these little devices are small ways of just upping the interest in the content.
Sure.
And then there's Alexandra Amore, who's in Canada, who's a VA, who also does the show notes, which go along with the podcast. So she'll listen to the episode when it's done. She'll create the show notes, make sure the transcript is there, and so that's a few of us involved in the podcast every week.
Just a small team.
Yeah. But we could do it ourselves, right? So, but
sure.
We are also, at the moment, I'm editing a new course, TikTok for Authors, which is a really complex course, and it's on my plate every day. I'm trying to write my second book. Mark's a full-time author as well as doing SPF, and so that's the reason why we outsource all this stuff. And as long as we're selling courses and the company's working, it pays for itself. So
sure, yeah. Well, that's one of the things that you're supposed to do, right? As soon as you can, is get stuff off your plate onto somebody else's plate. If your time is more valuable than what you're spending it on, find somebody else who can do it for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you said Dropbox, you said Slack. Is that all you're using to keep track of this stuff? Are there other pieces of software involved in running this team?
We did use Trello for a bit, but none of us really liked it. A couple of people liked it, so we've stopped using that for project management. Slack is our main tool. Yeah, I think that's an email, obviously. Oh, yeah, I tell you, I use a calendar. I mean, there's lots of different calendars available. Sure. I use Acuity. I really like it, and that does the automation. So I have a landing page which John helped set up, and I give that address out to potential guests, and they click on it, and it is basically a form that goes straight into the calendar, fills in all the information about who they are, what I should call them, where they live, because we send everybody who's a guest on our podcast a mug or something like that. We also ask them for a bit of background and what themes they'd like to discuss in the interview, and whether they're going to add anything, which I can talk about in a second. Actually, it's quite an important part of it, whether they're going to offer a PDF or a free book or something to go along with their talk. So that then creates a calendar entry with all that information in it, and they then get automatically a series of emails. They get one immediately saying, here's, thank you very much for booking this date and this time. And then I think a week before, you've got a week into your interview, and then an hour before, you've got an hour before your interview. I could put a Zoom link in there, which I think you do, but I decided I would always leave the Zoom link until the last minute. So basically, I emailed them the Zoom link at 5 minutes to, or 2 minutes to, probably, on the day. So yes, so Acuity. I really like Acuity, and it works really simply and smoothly.
Yeah, it sounds similar to Calendly, which is what I'm using. Maybe a little bit more robust. I don't think Calendly, I can set it up to send emails. Maybe I can. I just haven't looked into it.
Yeah, I don't know. But Calendly is a widely used one. So it wouldn't surprise me if you can do all that.
Yeah. You're asking your guests to provide their name, pronunciation, well, obviously their name, their name, pronunciation, and you said something about whether they're going to bring something to the show. What is that?
Yeah, so because, why are we doing a podcast? We're doing it, bluntly, we're doing it for lead generation. I mean, sure. I love doing it. I love the value it brings to the community. And I think our interviews over the last 3 years, 3.5 years, we've done 300 odd episodes now. I think they are, is that 5 years actually? Gosh, I think they're a little snapshot of the historical burgeoning of self-publishing. So I love them for that. But we do it from a business point of view because it's lead generating, and people understand that we have courses as well, and they hear about them through the podcast. And so you do need to get people onto your mailing list at some point, not just listening. And PDF's a really good way of doing that. So we have a really entertaining guest who says this is the 5 things that romance authors always get wrong. And they have a PDF that goes along with it. So we will come up with the URL.
On the fly, usually. During the episode?
During the episode, absolutely. I'll say, because I know we're recording it a month out, right? So we've got plenty of time to set the stuff up. So I'll say, yes, it's selfpublishingformula.com/romance mistakes. And then we make sure that something I have to do is to just drop into Slack afterwards to John. In today's interview I recorded with so-and-so, I invented this URL. It needs to be in place by the time we release the interview.
Have you ever missed any of those?
Occasionally what happens is, that's one of the good things about having a team, is because John's edited the interview, and then Catherine listens to the interview as soon as it's at the beginning of the week when it's going to go live. She'll listen to it as well. She'll proof it. And at that point, she will catch that. So she'll say, hang on, there's a giveaway. James mentions a giveaway in the middle of it. And so that has happened, yes, for sure. But it takes a few minutes to set that up. And yeah. We have Infusionsoft, which is our kind of email service provider. And I am the only Infusionsoft person in the company, which is slightly frustrating for me, but I do all of that side of it. So I'll set up a little sequence that delivers the PDF and adds them to our mailing list. But yeah, it's an important part of it.
Yeah, your podcast is, textbook content marketing machines. It's fantastic. You educate people through the podcast, which leads to people finding you, trusting you, which leads to people buying your courses. And full disclosure, I am a student of SPF. I have the SPF 101 course, which has been great.
Great.
Was that the intention from the beginning? Was the podcast built to generate the leads, or did the courses come later?
No, the courses were first, or the first Ads for Authors was first, and the podcast was added on. We always intended to do it right from the beginning, but we had too much on in the formation year of the company. But we always intended to do it, and it was always intended as a lead generator to bring people on. Of course, the trick is it's got to be good, right? So there's no point having rubbish information and not being very good and expecting people to, and even if they did join your list, they're going to join your list thinking these guys are a bit ropey and I'm not going to give them any money for a course. So your podcast has to be good, because that's the first, it's like your shop window. It's the first bit of credibility opportunity you've got with people to say we know what we're talking about, or we are a place or valuable resource that will add value to what you're doing. So you do obviously have to get all of that right. But then once people have decided to take that step and join your list through it, they've already decided, hopefully, that you are, well, the real deal, or whatever they want to call it.
I'd like to jump back to you for just a minute, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You recently published your first novel, so congratulations on that, The Final Flight. How's the reception been to that?
It's been really good. So I did this very publicly, this novel, as you might know, listening to the show.
Yep.
And so it was a bit of a millstone around my neck for a few years, because honestly, I'd written it for NaNoWriMo a long time ago and then not done anything with it. Did I start rewriting? I started writing it again. It was like 110,000 words. It was ridiculous.
What's the final word count?
The final word count was 124,000,
okay.
So it came down a lot. But it was rambling and I didn't really know what I was doing. So I learned how to write a novel very publicly through the podcast, doing interviews. I met Jenny Nash.
Jenny Nash, yeah.
So I interviewed Jenny Nash, who's an LA-based book coach and really good. And I knew during that interview that I didn't really know what a book coach was, but I knew I needed one the moment I understood what that was about. So I got together with Jenny. She sorted me out with one of her team. And then I went through another process of kind of learning how to write. It was another long-winded version of the book at that point. And then I worked with another development editor, did all of this very publicly. It cost me quite a lot of money. I paid for all of it myself. But then in the end, I ended up with quite a tight novel. And, well, I don't know. I mean, the feedback's been amazing as far as I'm concerned. I've got knocking on Amazon.co.uk. It's a bit of a British-centric book, so if you check it on Amazon.co.uk rather than America, it's because it's about the RAF. It doesn't do as well in America. But let me just check. Yeah, 435 reviews, and
oh wow.
The vast majority of those, 65%, are 5 stars. So
nice.
I get really good feedback, and I had it's set in the 1960s, Royal Air Force, Cold War in the UK, and I had a couple of messages about 2 weeks ago from a wing commander who flew and did trials. It's a test pilot thing, and did trials at Boscombe Down, and he was fulsome in saying, I don't know how you've done it, but you have captured the reality of what it was like in the officers' mess, where the decisions were made, and the drinking culture, and how we talk to each other, and the atmosphere. So he said, bravo, well done. And that's, for me, I was really pleased with that, because
yeah, I'd imagine.
Obviously meant a lot. So yeah, the reception's been good, and I'm running ads to it. So it's only one book, which is, gets us onto the whole marketing side of things, what our organisation is all about. And one book is very, very difficult to make profit on. You're not going to, most people are not going to retire on one book, although of course it does happen occasionally. But for the rest of us, it's usually a loss leader. And the idea is that ultimately you have a number of books. I mean, Mark has 30 odd. A lot of authors I speak to have at least 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that. A few have 3 or 4. But you put a lot of money into book one in terms of advertising, so people get to know you. Hopefully join your own mailing list, but then you make your profit when they buy books 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on, because you're not advertising, you're not spending any money on them, there's no cost, the money comes in as all profit. But I am running ads to this book just to kind of build an audience at this stage, and amazingly I'm making small amount of money. So I lose money a little bit some months and I make money other months, but overall I'm just up on it. Not in terms of the amount of money I sunk into editing and the audiobook production. I haven't paid that off anywhere close to that, and I'll have to make decent profit over a year or so with other books. But yeah, so I've sort of proved the Mark Dawson formula, which is if you get your advertising right, it does work. So all I need now is for books 2, 3, 4, and 5 and so on for my readers to go to, and that should be, well, hopefully when I'm in a few years from now, will be some income for me.
How's the second book coming along?
Funnily enough, I finished the rough draft, which is a much, much better, closer draft to the end one than the first draft of my last book, I can tell you. I finished it yesterday.
Is it going to take 10 years for us to see this book?
It is not going to take 10 years. I've printed it out. It's in my hand here. It's actually only 57,000 words at the moment. There is a bit in the middle missing, but it's going to be probably end up about 75,000 words. So I've deliberately made it a much tighter tighter book. I don't want to do a huge wordy book again. And yeah, so I'm about to start reading it on paper, making my notes, and then going back, filling in that middle bit, which I know needs to be done, and doing some, basically the revision stage, which will bring out the story and the character development a bit more. But my aim is to have it out in May. So yeah, I've got my work cut out. I've basically got the rest of this month and February to do the revision and get it to a development editor to read and hand back to me, and then for final edits, and then have it out in May. So that will be a year.
May. That's a tight timeline.
It is. You've worried me saying that. Is it too tight, do you think? We'll see.
I don't know. I believe in you, James.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris.
I think you can do it.
But it took a long time to do the last one, and my aim is to have a book a year now. I think with everything else I do, that should be realistic.
Sure. If you'd never started working with Mark building SPF, do you think that you would have written this book?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I had already written it before I met Mark. Actually, not really before I met Mark. I did know Mark at the time, but it was nothing to do with him. There was no influence on it at all. I just happened to start writing this book in 2010 when we were working together. But I would not have fished it out of the drawer, the electronic digital Word document drawer, and turned it into a novel without him. And it was so hard doing that. It was such a slog and slow, so frustrating and depressing at points when I knew that it wasn't good enough, or I wasn't good enough, and I had to work through all of that, to learn a lot about writing and how story works and structure, that I just can't envisage how I would have carried on had I not had been working in this environment and it being sort of an important thing from the company point of view for me to do it, and B, done it publicly so everyone knew I was doing it and wondered when my book was coming out. I had to have all of that piled on top of me to birth this book, and it did feel like a laboured birth. So yeah, I think the answer is probably a fairly safe no. It would not have seen the light of day.
Yeah, but now you have the momentum, and second book is moving a lot quicker, so that's good.
So much easier. It was so much easier writing the second draft. I mean, people said it would be, and it really was, and I've really enjoyed it. I'm intrigued to read it now, to know if it's any good. I go back a little bit during the drafting stage, probably too much, but I've got an idea of it. But I'm excited to get reading that. It's my job for today and tomorrow to start that.
You said the first book kind of felt like a millstone around your neck for a couple of years. Do you feel like this second book has a different kind of pressure now that the first book is out and you have readers potentially waiting for the next one?
I don't think I ever felt pressure for the book to come out. I always knew it's my book. If I'm going to publish it, I'll publish it. If I don't, I don't. And I enjoyed the fact that people harried me about it, but I didn't really take that to heart. I never felt under that sort of pressure. By millstone, I mean, it was just, I wanted it to come out, but there was always this mountain in front of me, and that laboured me down, and it felt like a slog. But that was pressure I put on myself, really. So in the same way, if I don't want to publish another book in my life, I won't. And I'm quite happy to front that up and say to people, no, I decided not to. I mean, I do want to. I really want to, and I really want to write a series of books. I'm inspired by a lot of the comments I've got about my first book, about which characters they think would be good in spin-offs. So I really want to do it, but it feels absolutely a much lighter exercise than the first book. The story is better. It's more of a novel-y story. The first book was a bit of a kind of emotional thing, loaded up with emotion about the male kind of psyche and stiff upper lip and all that stuff. And the second book is much more of a thriller, younger people who have not quite got to that stage in their life of stiff upper lip, but things happen and they have to make big decisions. So it feels a bit more like the kind of Clive Cussler books that I like reading.
Yeah, I used to read a ton of Clive Cussler.
Yeah.
His Dirk Pitt character is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely, and strangely, I don't think he's still alive, but he's still writing, isn't he? He's one of those authors,
yeah, right? Yeah,
who's a son or ghostwriters, whoever is writing them. So yeah,
Clive has passed on, but Clive books are still being created.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, and it's very much. I think it's very much in that tone. And I read one of the later ones, actually. Was it a Clive Cussler or was it his son? I can't remember. Just as I was coming to the end of Final Flight, my first book, and that book, that storyline, the way it moved, the way it started, very much in my mind. So I wrote book 2.
Cool. I'm reading the first book right now. I wanted to have it done before this interview, but that didn't happen. But yeah, it's been good so far. I've been enjoying it.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Yeah. So, yeah, sorry it's so long.
No worries. I started a little bit late in order to get it done in time for this, so that's my fault. You and Mark do a lot of stuff together. You're not just doing the SPF, the courses and the business and the podcast, and you personally, you write books. You guys also have Fuse books, which we haven't talked about, Hello books, which we haven't talked about. If you had to pick one label to apply to yourself, podcaster, entrepreneur, author, something else, what would you go with?
Oh God, that's quite difficult, isn't it? I mean, at least they are loosely all affiliated in self-publishing. Yeah, I don't know, and I don't think it's a great situation at the moment, being spread quite as thinly as I am. I'm really hoping that I end up doing less, certainly on the Hello Book side in the future. What do you know? People say, "What do you do?" I say I work in self-publishing.
Yeah.
If people ask me what I do. And which sounds a bit odd, right? Because you work in self-publishing, but aren't you just supposed to be a self-publisher? But I said, no, I help other authors publish their books. And if they want to know more, they want to know more at that point. So that's basically what I say.
What do you enjoy working on the most between the writing, the books, the podcasts, the companies, the courses?
Writing, I enjoy the most. And that's the one I fantasize about, waking up in the morning and having nothing to do but write my books and market them. I enjoy marketing my book. And the Fuse books, I do actually feel, I didn't feel pressure to write my book, and all the rest of it. I'm quite good at compartmentalizing that, but I actually do feel pressure with Fuse books because there's 4 other authors and they rely on that income, and Mark is pretty hands off on that. So I wake up in the morning sweating those figures, and it's been difficult. It's been a slog the last 6 months on Facebook advertising. So I enjoy the results of that because it's gone well and we're making a profit with every author. But if someone suddenly took that away from me, I'd feel a little bit lighter in step during the day.
Do you have time to listen to many podcasts at all, or you make your podcast and then you're on to something else? Do you ever listen to anybody else's work?
I used to listen to quite a lot, and I've really fallen out of the habit. I've been listening to audiobooks actually recently. Okay. A bit more time. So there's the podcasts I do listen to. The only one I don't really miss is more of a comedy one. It's Adam Buxton's podcast here in the UK, and Adam's he's a partner of film director Joe. What's Joe's surname? I've forgotten, but he directed quite a few big films. But I've watched them every stage of my life as kids, mucking about on YouTube, and then getting their first TV gig, and then Joe getting his first film, and Adam appearing as a comedian. And so, but he does this brilliant podcast, which I still religiously listen to every episode of that. I don't listen to so many in the publishing space anymore. I used to listen to Joe every week, but I haven't for a while. I don't really know why.
Joe being Joanna Penn, Creative Penn podcast.
Joe Penn. I used to listen to the self-publishing guys as well, Johnny and David and Sean, but they haven't done a podcast for a bit. So I don't actually at the moment. Should get back into that because I enjoyed that.
Well, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and that means basically that I don't listen to any audiobooks. So I'm kind of on the other side of it, and sometimes I wonder if I should be listening to more audiobooks and less podcasts. I don't know if there's a right answer there. I've enjoyed the audiobooks. It's taken me a while to get into them, but quite a lot of my friends consume them great deal. And so I started to get into it. I quite like sticking them on in the bar when I'm in the bath, or working on something else, or driving. Are there any books you've read or any media that you've consumed that has influenced how you guys make your show?
I mean, I do look around at some of the production values, but I'll be honest, because we do video, certainly in my end of stuff. I mean, Mark's sort of in between places at the moment because he's having an office built in his garden, so he's going to get a lot better. But he's been in his house recently. We've been recording, screen grabbing a Zoom link. I think our production values have always been pretty high. Our audio quality has always been pretty high, so I haven't really learnt from other people looking at that. Oh, I tell you what, tell the person who did the audio quality, I think it's fantastic, and we did get influenced by him, is the San Diego, sorry, my mind's gone today, the San Diego-based passive income guy who you will know.
Is that Pat Flynn?
Pat Flynn. So Pat Flynn's podcast. Okay, yeah. The sound quality is superb. He has a brilliant microphone. So I got that microphone. I think it's the Shure microphone. And also, it took me ages to work out he gets people to record at their end. the audio, which is what I'm doing for you, and it makes a big difference. It doesn't go through all the filtering and compression that happens when you send audio across the internet and you record it at your end. So you put it together afterwards, and it makes a big difference to the sound, the audio quality. So unfortunately, not everyone will be able to do that. In fact, most of my guests aren't able to record locally. They sometimes say yes, and what they mean is they'll press record on Zoom, but that's not what we're after here. We're after kind of a quality microphone into a digital recorder. He does that, and whether he sends them the equipment in advance and they send it back or something, I don't know, but it makes a big difference. I have definitely been influenced by Pat Flynn's podcast. I love his voice as well. He's got a great broadcasting voice.
Yeah, he really does. It's kind of funny that you brought him up. He has been mentioned on probably 50% of the podcast interviews that I've done for this show, and I think you're 7th or 8th maybe for me.
Wow.
So maybe 3 or 4 of the episodes that I've done so far, Pat has come up. I would love to get him on. Pat Flynn, if you're listening, please come on my podcast.
We've said such nice things about you, Pat. I have met him, and he is a really nice guy. So yeah, hopefully, but he's also very good at time management, isn't he? So
yeah, absolutely. Have you heard of Tim Ferriss's podcast at all? Did you ever listen to that?
Yes, and I used to listen to Tim Ferriss's podcast quite a lot. I haven't listened to it for a couple of years, so I'm not up to date on what he's doing now. But yeah, absolutely.
I heard on an episode, maybe at the end of last year, I can't remember, that he buys his guests microphones and just ships them a microphone in advance of the interview just to make sure that they get that quality, which is a small investment for him, I'm sure, to send them a $100 microphone, but it certainly helps.
That's a brilliant thing, and you look at how much his sort of empire turns over. That's probably a good investment. I have done that. I mean, I have done it in the past. And I can't remember who it was now. It was we had a couple of reasonably big authors on. Felicia Yap, I think, was one of them quite early on. And I sent her the microphone in the post exactly like that. So she's still got that microphone. But then the trouble is they're not always competent enough to use it properly and stuff. Right. So it does turn... I do. That's the other thing about our job and mine in particular is the time. I want things to be as quick and easy as possible, so I don't do a lot of reading up on guests before much more than they've put into the Acuity calendar that I mentioned earlier, and I don't particularly want the first 15-20 minutes of the connection to be me talking them through setting up equipment and stuff. So
sure,
because I've got a whole list of things to do every day. So, but yes, if they can do it, they do it, and some people absolutely, they'll be like you, they'll go, yeah, of course I can, or I am for you, I can record locally, no problem. And then that's great. But yeah, I think that audio quality is the most important technical thing, isn't it? Because we do video, but it doesn't really matter. You could even put a still picture up if you lose the video feed. It's not the end of the world. But when people are out jogging or they're in their car and if it's a bad audio connection, they're not going to give the podcast a complete listen. So it is important.
A little inside baseball there. That's part of the reason I chose podcasters as my target, because I know that they should have decent quality on their end already if they're making a podcast.
Yeah. And do you have a microphone of choice, Chris?
Oh, goodness. I'm planning on getting a Rode Procaster. Currently, I am using a very old AKG D880 dynamic micro. It looks like a Shure SM58.
Right. Yeah, I think I know the one.
I have it running through a Cathedral Pipes Durham, which is similar to a cloud lifter for some extra clean gain. And then I have it running through a DBX channel strip so that I've got a gate on it and I've got some compression, or it runs into my mixer and then into my computer. So the microphone itself is fairly cheap, but I have a somewhat extensive signal chain to try and clean that up on the in between the microphone and the recording device.
Well, I think it sounds really good. I think you've got a good voice for it as well, but that's why I was interested. So yes, and I have a Shure SM7B, which is the sort of music industry one.
It's the classic.
It is the classic, and I do like it. I think, I shouldn't quote him anymore, but I think Thriller was recorded using the SM7B.
That's what I heard, yeah.
Yeah. But this actually, the microphone I'm using for you, because the Shure is an XLR mic.
Yep.
But I'm actually recording this on a Rode NT1.
Okay.
Or NT USB.
That's a condenser microphone, correct?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so it works slightly differently. It requires a bit of power, but it's a pretty good crisp sound, I think, the Rode. I mean, they've done a good job, haven't they, Rode, in adapting themselves quickly to this new market. I guess in the past they would have sold X number of microphones to very specialist people, at least people at a minimum who are going to pubs and bars and performing songs, but probably owned recording studios. And then suddenly there's a gazillion people who have a studio in their garden and are doing podcasting. And so they've adapted quickly, I think, and reduced the price of the microphones to make them very affordable.
So you have the SM7B, that's your primary microphone. What else are you using with that? Because that is an XLR. So where does that plug into? What's the rest of that signal chain look like?
So that's a good question. I'm going to look under my desk because I've forgotten what it's called. I can't see it because it's in a ton of cables, but I have a little box, a little condenser box, and I'm not as technical as you probably about this, but what I tend to do is read up about it at the time, understand what needs to happen, do it, and then forget what I've done.
Then forget it, yeah.
So at the time I would have been a brief expert on this, but I have a little box it goes into, which is basically gives it a bit of gain and filtering, and then it goes through to a Zoom recorder, which is not one of those handheld ones. It's like a desk-mounted one, an F4. It would go into a rack if I had a rack. Yeah, it's the F4 Field multi-track. And I really like that because I have it in front of me now, so I can see the gain. I can adjust the gain during the interview if I need to, and it records every track separately as well. So everything's separate for the edit afterwards.
Does that record locally? I'm not familiar with that. Does that record to an SD, or do you have that running into your computer as well?
No, I think you probably can have it. There is a USB out on it, but I don't use that. So I record it into. It has dual SD cards in the back, and you can set them up to either record duplicate just as a backup in case an SD card goes down, or what I do is I put a mixed version on one card and separate channels on the other card, just so I've got a full range of options if there's any problems afterwards. So. Yeah, and I think that was quite expensive, the field recorder. But one of the things we did, we went to NINC, a Florida-based writers' conference just before lockdown, obviously, I guess 2019, and we recorded an episode of the podcast live. So we had people roaming the room with microphones, and I bought a radio mic, quite a nice radio mic, and we had a stick mic, which somebody else had for the guest who sat up on the stage with us, and then 2 tie mics, all from my broadcasting days. I probably purloined them from the BBC, actually. And they were all 4 of them were plugged into this field recorder, which I had in front of me. Nice. Even as the guest, and I could adjust all the levels, and I could turn them, close them off when we didn't want them, and the rest. And it was brilliant for that. And we got a really good, considering when I was at the BBC, a small room was filled with equipment just to produce a small TV report, and today in your back pocket with your iPhone you have almost a recording studio quality setup.
It's incredible.
It has been a massive jump, and I have loved that aspect of it. So
everything's definitely getting condensed. Everything's getting a little bit easier. The technology is democratizing the process a little bit. What do you get personally out of making your podcast?
I've always been a people person, I guess you'd say. I don't think you could be a good interviewer without being interested in other people. And so that's the best thing about it, is getting to chat to other people. And I think I probably see the good in most people. So I would say 95% of the interviews go really well. There's only 5% of, every now and again, there's somebody who you sort of just take against a little bit, or for whatever reason. But most of the time, I get enormous enjoyment out of that. Yesterday, these 2 young women who are sisters who recently were at the top of the Kindle charts with the 7th in their series of romance books, and they work out of Kent, and I've known them for about 4 years, since one of them came up to me at a conference and introduced herself, said she listened to the podcast, and they are they are definitely among the best-selling indie authors on the planet as we speak, and we just spoke for an hour yesterday, full of laughter and hilarity, because they're quite self-conscious about the books they write, and I've read one of them which they thought was hilarious, but I learned a lot about how they operate, how they work between each other, and I like them a lot, and that's a very typical interviewing experience for me, and so I get that out of it, which is in many ways more nourishing than any kind of lead generator and course sale you're going to make from it.
Sure. Do you have any outlandish or funny stories that have come up while you've been making your show? Has anything just gone disastrously wrong, and then you've kind of just had to laugh about it afterwards?
I don't think I've had any major disasters, because I guess because it's not live, right?
Sure.
In the old days of live stuff, things would sometimes go wrong, and they have done for me with the BBC. But because this is all recorded, you can just start again. I think I've only lost the audio once. So only once did we were recording with no backup, I think just using ScreenFlow in those days, everything plugged directly into it, and it just didn't save at the end of it. And if it's a proprietary save format before you've exported it, and if you don't save it, you can't access it, it's gone. So I've only lost an interview once, which is really frustrating to get somebody back. They were very good about it, but yeah, I don't think I've had any disasters I can think of. Not compared to the old live days of news broadcasting, where that was definitely a possibility every day.
The losing an episode is something that kind of keeps me up at night. I need to figure out some sort of backup system. I have the Zoom recording going. I have my DAW recording, and that's great as long as my computer doesn't crash. But if my computer crashes, I'm out of luck right now.
Yeah. I don't suppose the Zoom recording would survive in the cloud, would it? I don't know.
I don't know. No, it saves it locally, I think, when I'm done.
Yeah, no, that is definitely. So the Zoom recorder, my Zoom recorder records the audio, has direct inputs from the computer and from my microphone. And if the computer goes down or we have a power cut, everything recorded up to that point in audio will be there. What I will lose is the screen flow of their video link. That's the only thing I'd lose. And ultimately, probably would just put a still up of them. So I think we'll get around that.
I think I heard recently that self-publishing show hit something like 50,000 downloads a week. Is that true? Like, how big is your show?
I don't think it's 50,000. I know we were approaching 3 million total downloads. I think it's 20,000 a week.
Okay.
I think what happens is we end up with sort of a new episode has somewhere
only 20,000.
Yeah, it has somewhere around sort of 13,000 views or downloads by the end of the week across all the platforms. 14,000, something like that. But there's another 6,000 or 7,000 of listens to the week before any of the previous episodes. So that's where that total figure comes from.
Okay.
So each episode probably eventually gets to about 20,000 after it's sat there for a year, because of course lots of people go back and listen.
We have an extensive backlog.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to get that kind of traction?
It's been slow growth. We started pretty well. We started with a bang. We spoke to Apple, actually, leveraged Mark's relationship with Apple, and we got our call with the iTunes guys, and they said, look, this is how our algorithm works, and this is what you need to do, and have 3 episodes ready to go, have a taster episode, release at least 2 episodes to start off with. And we got a new, I think whether it was a result of that call or just because we managed to get some publicity around it, we were in their new and noteworthy list for the first month or so. So it got off to a pretty good start, and it's been a gradual growth since then. So I was a bit surprised, actually, went through the figures at episode 300 and saw how many downloads we're having now. I thought we were getting sort of 7,000 to 8,000 a week. Yeah. But then Tom said to me, no, we passed 10,000 some time ago. So yeah, so that's good. And like I say, I genuinely think that the self-publishing show is a track record, a historical track record of the development of self-publishing, which in 100 years, it sounds very pretentious, but in 100 years' time will be a useful resource for people looking at how that particular industry developed.
Absolutely. It's almost like a time capsule a little bit.
Yeah, and then in 100 years' time, I don't know what publishing will look like. I think probably in 20 years' time, publishing won't look like it looks today. So it'll be we are living through an interesting period.
You're very adept at advertising books. Do you advertise the podcast at all, or is it strictly word of mouth still?
We don't advertise the podcast. We don't. The only thing we do is we publish it on Facebook during the week as an extra sort of outlet. Gets kind of live preview, but I do not think we do advertise it. No, perhaps we could. We could pick out some choice episodes with downloads attached to them, and give them a push. Good idea.
How would you drive growth to a new podcast if you were starting over? As podcasts are notoriously difficult to share. Yeah.
Well, I think the same principles apply to podcasting that apply to any other aspect of online marketing, and that for me is you've got to be answering questions. It's the basis of SEO, I guess, of search engine optimization, is that people get drawn to our sort of non-fiction podcasts when they've got a problem to solve,
right,
or a question that needs answering. So I think keeping focused on that and remembering that. So if you have an interview with a romance author or a thriller author, in my case, how you title the episode and how you brand it. If you simply say, "Oh, great chat with a really good selling thriller author," okay, that it's going to be of moderate interest. But if you title it why thriller X outsold thriller Y, now that answers a question that people have. And why is my thriller not selling as much as somebody else's? So I think answering questions and providing solutions and insight is a key thing you need to do relentlessly with your podcast, week in, week out. But yeah, in terms of sharing it, I mean, you are right. It is something people get recommended to, I guess. I think appearing on other people's podcasts is quite a good thing to do as much as possible. That's another way of getting known, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I need to look into. That's the second time somebody's mentioned that, actually.
Yeah, I think it's a genuine growth strategy to try and do that. But I guess in the podcasting world, we don't want to make sure we're just appearing on each other's podcasts the whole time. We need to get some real people on at some point.
I have noticed sometimes when somebody has a book coming out or a movie coming out, at least on the podcast that I listen to, they'll pop up on one, and then the next week they'll be on another, and then another. And it's like they're doing the late night talk show thing, but on the podcast circuit.
Yeah, the podcast circuit. I tell you, the platform we're really interested in at the moment is TikTok. It looks like a frivolous, shallow platform at a glance, but it's actually a very fast-moving, very powerful new social media tool, and it's selling books like Billio. Those girls I mentioned yesterday, I shouldn't call them girls, those young women I mentioned yesterday, they got to number one in the store in the UK and .com and they had 7 books in the top 100 the week after, and they attribute that solely to TikTok, the difference between
really
their last launch and this launch. So I think TikTok is something I've started in the last 2 weeks. I spent 2 weeks trying to build up a sort of a Cold War history channel there by myself, and I've already got over 1,000. I've got 1,200 followers. I've had 7,500 views of my post yesterday, and I think whatever your podcast area is, you should look at TikTok. The same rules apply. Create a channel, stay in your lane, and don't make it too weak, but keep relentlessly focused on your subject area. Use the hashtags, and it's fertile ground at the moment to find readers and find listeners.
Is the strategy there the same as it is in other content marketing areas where you're trying to get them off the platform onto an email list, at which point you can sell to them on the email list, or are you trying to work directly on TikTok?
Yeah, I think it is the same. I think in the way that the other social media platforms are virtually all pay to play. You can reach so few people on Facebook now unless you're actually advertising, putting money that way, because that's how the platform's been designed and gone. You can probably reach a few more people on Twitter, but it's not a very worthwhile platform in our opinion for selling or getting people off onto mailing lists. With TikTok, I think you can do that, and we see examples of authors holding up a book and talking about it and immediately seeing a spike in sales. I mean, roughly maybe one sale every 250 views, something like that. So they're getting people to buy their books. In terms of getting them to join your mailing list, I mean, I suppose what you'd want to do is whatever you're pushing on your TikTok, like the book sale, is hopefully the book will lead to the mailing list, because that's partly what we would advise people to do anyway, to have something at the back of your book, to get people onto a mailing list. I would, like all of these things, I would focus as much as possible on providing value and see people then make it easy for them to find you, and see that as a natural progression. I wouldn't, go too overtly asking people to join your mailing list and as always, but that's exactly the same as marketing on any channel, is provide value first.
On the self-publishing show, you don't have any episode sponsors, but you do have a Patreon. At this point, at your scale, I would imagine that has to be a conscious decision. So what would be the reasoning behind that? Would you ever consider bringing sponsors on?
We have done. We are contacted from time to time. In fact, quite a big company has recently contacted us. We're kind of reluctant to do that. it's a lead generator for us, and it pays its way handsomely by bringing people into SPF, a percentage of whom will buy a course that's priced somewhere between $500 and $850. So we don't have to have very high conversion rates for the podcast to be profitable for us. So from that point of view, it's not actually necessary for us to, I don't think it's not the end of the world, is it, listening to a sponsor message, particularly if it dovetails really nicely with the theme of the podcast.
Sure.
But equally, if you don't have to, why would you? And I think that's where we are at the moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you have the courses, they sell well. They're not cheap courses by any means, as you said. So that works, and that's good. Who is an author that you would love to get on your podcast that you haven't gotten yet?
Well, I'm a big fan of a guy called Stephen Koontz, who is he's quite a bit long in the tooth now, but Stephen wrote Flight of the Intruder, and it was the book that I read as a 20-year-old, 20-year-old, maybe a bit younger than that, actually.
Did you say Stephen Koontz?
Koontz, C-O-O-N-T-S. People confuse him with Dean Koontz, but it's...
I was going to say, at first I thought you were going to say Stephen King, and then you went Stephen Koontz, and I was like, did he combine those names by mistake? Okay, I just haven't heard of him.
So he's not, I think he's well known amongst military aviation authors. And Flight of the Intruder is actually quite a famous novel. It was made into a film, not a particularly good film. The novel is fantastic. He's a brilliant writer, and I've read every book he's written. And his first book is the reason I wanted to be a writer. I mean, that's the book that made me think I could do this. I want to do this. I would love to get Stephen on, and the closest I've come to it is that. I mean, he would have nothing to say about self-publishing. I doubt. He's a writer who's been published his whole life, and why the hell would he, even love the idea of it?
Sure.
But I did notice there was somebody with his surname at 20 books, and in the list, I didn't meet her, but I looked her up on Facebook, did a moderate amount of stalking, and looked her up on Facebook, checked through her links, and she is Stephen Koontz's ex-wife.
Oh.
Which I was very excited about. So Stephen Koontz was a military aviator. He was a naval pilot in the Vietnam War, flew A6 Intruders, hence he wrote the book afterwards. So he's getting on a little bit, but there's a possible way in there for me. So I'd love to speak to him, but that's a personal thing.
Yep.
In terms of I'd love to have Neil Gaiman on. He's a big author. He won't have time for us, but I would love to have him on. We've occasionally talked about J.K. Rowling jokingly, just because she's the biggest author on the planet, but she's also she's the biggest self-published author on the planet, because she self-publishes the Potter ebooks, which I think is fascinating, and I'd like to hear a bit about her operation behind that, because that's not done through a publishing company, that's done through her own company, Pottermore. So
yeah, she notoriously held on to those rights. Yeah,
which is amazing. She's quite well known, and I don't know how much time she has for us, but there you go. We can dream, can't we?
Yeah, absolutely. What would you ask Stephen Koontz? Like, what would be if you could ask him a question, or Neil Gaiman, whose voice would be legendary on your podcast?
Yeah. Well, I always like talking to authors about process. Sometimes it's about plotting and discovery writing, or panting, whatever you want to call it, that process. But I'm also really interested in how they actually write. I find that actually the most useful bit is where they write, when they write. Do they go back over the stuff they've just written? Do they write through a first draft without stopping? Do they then read it? That process is fascinating to me, and everyone does it a bit differently, but I find that it's the actual creation of the book you're reading. So I'm more interested in that than I am. I woke up one morning with this great idea, which the ideas come to us in different ways. So that's the main thing I would ask. I think Stephen Koontz would be interesting, because he published in the 80s. Initially, and how that felt then to how it feels today, because publishing has changed. He probably doesn't have a good view. I'm putting words into mouth. He might not have a good view of self-publishing, because I think people who've made a living from being traditionally published probably see it as a bit of a threat to their industry, which I understand.
Yep.
But also what he's learned about storytelling through his writing. So yeah, I guess that's what I talked to him about.
How do you write, James?
Yeah, how do I write? So I've developed it a lot, because I wrote my first book absolutely not looking back at all, never rereading a paragraph, because I was doing NaNoWriMo, and you can't do that. You've got to get your 1,600 words done a day, whatever it is. And when I started reading the previous day, I realised I don't have time for this, so I moved forward. And then I started rewriting that book, and I spent ages going back over and rewriting the scene the day before. And so I've sort of got a hybrid case now where I read back over a chapter or two sometimes just to get me back into the flow, especially if I've missed a day or two or I've gone off to write a different part of the book. But generally I move forward with my first draft. Don't worry too much about grammar. I have a tendency to miss out words as my grammar thing when I'm writing a first draft, so don't worry too much about that. Get to the end of it. This is what I'm doing with book 2, and now I've printed it out. I could have put it on my Kindle, and it's not great use of paper, but I do prefer, I think, to have a pen and paper in my hand and feel very different from sitting in front of a computer.
Yeah.
Because I'll just try and rewrite it if I'm sat in front of a computer reading it, and I'll read it through. I'll make some big notes about big things, about what has to happen to a character differently from the way I've written it, all the way through to small notes about use of language and so on. And then I will go through that and revise that existing. That will be different from last time. I will revise the existing manuscript, whereas last time I rewrote it 3 times completely. Just started again with a blank bit of paper.
Really?
Yeah.
I can't imagine doing that.
I know, and I can't imagine doing it, but I did it. And I'm not going to do that again.
I think the process that you're describing is similar to the way that Stephen King talks about his revising in his On Writing book.
Yes, yeah. In fact, which I read during the process of writing The Final Flight. So yeah, probably not a coincidence I'm doing that way. It does feel like the right way of doing it. I think it's important now. What I mustn't do is get too into the weeds reading this book. I need to read it in one go, a nice flowing read, and work out what works about it. I mean, Jenny Nash talks about having a stoplight or traffic light, a system of red, amber and green. Red, this has got to be fixed. This is where this book is just a big patch that drags or whatever, or there's a problem where you've written yourself into a problem. Amber is this could be better, and green, this is great. And sort of using that approach to your revision, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, I could talk to you about actually writing in the process of that for a while, because that's something that I'm interested in. But just to get back to your podcast a little bit, the self-publishing show is available on YouTube as a video version. You've said that a couple times you guys wanted to do video from the very beginning. Looking at the YouTube channel, the videos, I mean, compared to the podcast downloads, they don't get a ton of views, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 views within the first couple months. How important is the video aspect to your podcast, and do you think the effort to make it a video version is worth it?
That's a really good question. I think we want to do video. I want to do video because it's my background, and I was a TV guy, and I always wanted to have that aspect of it. I think it's not the best environment for a podcast because they're long, like an hour long, the podcasts, and sat in front of I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I play a bit of golf, so I watch golfing YouTube videos. Obviously, I watch the same amount of comedy and music that people watch, and all of that is quite short form, isn't it? It's not that often you sit in front of a screen for that period of time. And if you are going to just play it on your phone and put it in your back pocket, well, you may as well do it through iTunes, right?
Right.
So from that point of view, it's not the best way. So the answer is it probably is more effort than we get out of it. And you're right, yeah, we get sort of 1,200, I think, probably a typical kind of weekly view of the episodes there. But we could do more with it, and I think YouTube is still a massively visited website. It's still like the second largest search engine.
So it's a huge search engine.
Or maybe Amazon's the second, Google, Amazon, maybe YouTube's third, something like that. People go on there and they search how to self-publish a book, and so we want to be able to catch those people. So I think it serves a purpose being there, and it's kind of we're recording anyway, so to have the cameras running, it's not a massive effort beyond now that we've got a process in place for the turnaround of that. So if John Stone, our editor, was only editing audio, it's not going to make a massive difference to him. He locks the video and audio together at the beginning and then does the edit. So I don't think it's a massive weight of work on top of doing the audio. But you are right. It's by far our biggest number of downloads are on iTunes, and there's another one. I don't do that side of things, but there's another one I can't remember the name of that records a lot of downloads. Yeah, but I'm not going to take a video away anytime soon.
Yeah, well, if you enjoy it, absolutely put it up there. The editing process for that, I'm curious, is there much editing that's done on your podcast? And if there is, I assume that the video and the audio are getting edited at the same time. You said that they were locked together. Is the audio editing being done inside a video editing suite? Like, are you using video software to be doing the final audio edit?
Yes. Yeah. So we edit it as one. So John will use Adobe Premiere Pro. He'll import the video. He'll import the 2 video tracks and the 2 audio tracks. The first thing he'll do is sync them, which is a lot easier than it used to be. It actually does it automatically. You can run a program, or you can just look at people's mouths and line them up. We used to do a clap. I won't do it to sort of scare you with the ears, but a clap where you can see the hands coming together.
I know what a clap sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. Don't need a demo. So you can you see the hands coming together, and you see the spike on the audio, and you lock those two together. That's an easier way to doing it as well. But anyway, he'll sync them very quickly at the beginning, and then he'll have a timeline with the 2 video tracks and 2 audio tracks all synced, and he will edit the video together and cut between the 2 video tracks as he goes along when whoever's speaking. He'll do a little bit of processing on the sound there to make sure it's hard limiter, so you're not busting any limits, and maybe a little bit of filtering.
And then that audio just he exports the video with the audio as one file, and then he exports an audio only version, I assume, to get uploaded into your distribution platform. Yeah,
exactly right. And I don't know whether because within Premiere Pro you can export to Audition, which is it called Audition, which is their audio software,
which is
quite a complex suite of audio stuff. And he may export the audio there and then do a little bit more to it before he exports it. Again, I don't know, but probably not actually. He may well use it for the video as well, and then just export it as one file. So he'll come out with an MP4 and an MP3. Basically,
it's quite a process to put your podcast together. How far in advance are you recording your interviews?
So the interviews, this time last year we had quite a backlog, probably 6 to 8 weeks. So if I was recording today, it'd be a month and a half to 2 months before it came off the shelf. I think that was a bit too long, because we sometimes do talk about contemporary things, particularly when the pandemic hit. Whereas now, just because I don't know exactly why, it's slightly concerning to me. We've gone to almost having one interview ready to go, and I record it and it goes the next week, which is we've probably got 3 interviews now, so we're 3 weeks ahead at the moment. Probably about right, but it's a balance between being contemporaneous, which I think is a good thing for a podcast, to be able to talk about contemporary things, and not panicking that you're running out of material. So somewhere between those two. So at the moment in fact I can look in our cut interviews folder, and I think there's 3 interviews in there. So that gives us 3 weeks to go.
How are you finding guests? Are they coming to you at this point, or are you still reaching out to them?
No, we're reaching out. Guests do come to us, but often they're not in our wheelhouse, really. A bit of a cliche, isn't it? Wheelhouse. Stay in your lane, wheelhouse. I speak the lingo, don't I?
Full of metaphors.
Yeah, exactly. So people come to us and they're like entrepreneurs hawking their book on how to be a go-getter. And it's not really publishing or self-publishing. And so, we do say no to quite a few people who come up unsolicited to us. So we go out after them. So Tom does that as his primary job, but I will also send him ideas. Like yesterday a couple of days ago, I noticed Lucy Score, who's wonderful and been on our podcast several times, as a friend of mine now. She was number 1 in the store, which is amazing. But numbers 2 and 3 were romance writers who are in our SPF community, who I don't know. I don't know them at all, but I searched on the group, and they are both members. And so we had numbers 1, 2 and 3 in the .com Amazon store, which is amazing. So it reminds me, I thought this morning as I was getting up, to say to Tom, try and track those 2 down, and we'll get them on. But Tom he'll look at who Joanna Penn is having. He'll look at there's a couple of other, JD Barker does a good podcast now. So he'll look at appearing on the other podcasts, and I just keep my ears to the ground. When I chat to people like Lucy says, oh, you should really speak to this person, they're doing really well. Or someone says, my agent is the most brilliant person at explaining how stories work. And so I'll say, fine, we'll get them on and we'll talk about storytelling. And I like those ones because they're often we're the first person to have that person on, first podcast to have that person on. Rather than somebody, as you say, it's kind of doing the rounds a bit on the podcast.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's Tom's job to reach out to them and fill the cupboard, if you like, with interviews.
So if he's reaching out to them, I assume he's scheduling them. How far in advance do you know who the guest is?
Quite a long way. So I block out Monday and Tuesday to do interviews, and I make myself available for only one interview a day because I've got lots of other stuff on. So from sort of 11 o'clock in the morning UK till I think 8 o'clock at night UK, which just about gives a bit of option for the people in California on the West Coast. They can do something mid-morning. So those 2 days, but as soon as the slot's taken, it's taken. So the maximum interviews I'm going to do is 2 a week. And if you went onto that calendar now, I think you're probably booking into February. But I can see them in the calendar. And of course, the great thing about that is I can click on the link and also see everything they've written about themselves. So although I'll be honest, Chris, I usually do that 10 minutes before the interview.
So you don't do a ton of research, or maybe any research on your guests then before they come on? You just go on and you have a list of questions that you're working off of?
No, I don't. And I think I rely on the fact that I've done, even before I started podcasting, I'd done thousands of interviews. Yeah. And as a news reporter, you rarely get a chance to do research on it. You are sent out, you'll get a brief from an editor who normally is telling you what an amazing story this is and how they see it working in the evening. And then you meet the guest and realise it's completely different and that the story's not quite what they wanted it and all the rest of it. But because of that background of not having to research, I just don't, and I find it a time zap. I like the conversation to flow. I like the interview to be a process of discovery for me, because that's how it's going to be for the listener, right? They don't know anything about that person, and if I know you can know too much about your interviewee, and you ask sort of. You skip some of the detail because you say, oh yeah, because you had that big success last year. So what do you think about your next book? And actually, the interviewer saying, I had a huge success last August, and the interviewee saying, oh really, what was that? That's a much more interesting thing to listen to, than somebody who knows too much. So I think it suits the fact that I'm busy and I'm hesitating to use the word lazy because I do work very hard, but it's partly, I suppose, that as well. I just don't want to spend all that time researching, but also it presents a more interesting discovery interview by the outset, I think.
Definitely something for me to keep in mind, although I think at this point I would be terrified to just hop on a call with somebody and not have at least something in front of me to work off of. But I have not done thousands of interviews, so I think still learning.
I think you can do it.
Do you have like one main interviewing tip that you would give to somebody who's trying to figure out how to do that?
So the two things that I think I mentioned one earlier is listen to the answers. It's a really obvious thing to say. It sounds like an obvious thing to say, but a lot of people don't do it. So listen to the answers. You'll find the interviews a lot easier to do that way because it'll flow. Don't worry too much about your next question. Base it on what they've said, and then use your list of questions as kind of prompts at some point when you think you want to move on to a new topic area. You probably only need 3 or 4 prompts in front of you. And the rest of the interview, the rest of the questions are based on what they're saying, and then it becomes more of a flowing conversation. And the second thing is not to walk all over your interviewee. So there's a golf guy I like called Rick Shields, and So
I watch Rick actually.
Okay, so you watch Rick. So he did an interview recently with Tommy Fleetwood, and I really like Tommy Fleetwood, a pro golfer, very down to earth, very nice guy, brilliant golfer. And much as I love Rick, and I will continue to watch his YouTube channel, he talked all over him in that interview. He kept barking at him, in the end, Tommy Fleetwood sitting there listening to Rick Shields telling him stories about what happened to him that weren't that great. And I'm thinking, I'm not watching this interview for you. You're the presenter. So get out the way of your interviewee and let them talk, and then prompt them and have your conversation. But get out the way of the interviewee is the other thing I would say. My 2 tips.
Do you also watch Peter Finch?
I don't. Is he a golfer as well, is he?
He is, yeah. And he's actually done some videos with Rick. I think they're in the same area. So they do some course videos together.
Well, maybe I have seen them then. Yes, didn't know his name. But yeah. Yeah, I mean, Rick works best, doesn't he, when he's on the course.
Yeah, by himself.
By himself, and testing equipment and stuff. And I love all that stuff. And and he could be a better interviewer, but he almost needs somebody to say, okay, here's a couple of interview techniques. But yeah, listen to the answers and get out the way of your interviewee.
Where do you see podcasts going in the future? Are we still on the leading edge, or is this a mature market?
Well, I suppose we have to start thinking about the metaverse, don't we? I mean, this is
God.
Yeah. So. You better get your VR headset.
I won't be part of that.
Yeah. And it does feel like something too much, doesn't it? There's one more thing, I can't do this one, I'm going to opt out. I don't know, I always get excited by technology, so I'm kind of excited about all those possibilities. I mean, I saw a stat the other day, someone posted something about how many podcasts there are in the world, but not to be too despondent, because like 95% of them are not active. 95% of podcasts don't get past episode 3, don't post regularly, or haven't posted regularly in the last year. So there's actually only a few thousand that are routinely updated and posted. So I think there's still scope for people who want to enter this and make a splash, but you've got to have longevity, you've got to stick with it. I don't know, in the long term for podcasting, I mean, I suppose more people might add video like we're doing. Might become, you'd think, wouldn't you, that video would become as devices get more powerful and can stream more easily, that might start to become a requirement. Although it's funny how stuff becomes legacy quite quickly and stuck in its ways. So I can't see Apple iTunes adding a video component to their podcasting tool quickly, because that would involve re-engineering a lot of stuff that's been there for 15, 20 years. But
sure. Is there anything else that we should talk about? Did we miss anything that you wanted to cover?
I don't think so. So I think I've told you about the extent of my technical knowledge, which is not as good as it was when I was setting all this stuff up at the time. My main thing, really, I think the only thing I can bring that's just from experience, is the interviewing, which I talked about. It means a lot to me, because I do, when you do listen to other podcasts, you do listen to those interviewers that are really good, that have a flowing conversation and allow their interviewee to breathe and find their way. And I think if you can, and it's only experience, you can't start off like that. It's like anything. When you first start doing it, you're going to be a bit ragged, a bit nervous. So maybe you can back off a bit, but the more interviews you do, just get them done one after the other, you do start to get experienced in that. And I think that makes such a difference to your podcast. So I guess the main thing that I think I can say about podcasting.
James, thank you so much for coming on Who Makes a Podcast. Where can people find you? Where do you want to send them?
Well, I guess selfpublishingformula.com is the stop-off point if you're interested in self-publishing your books. We offer a lot of resources. Obviously, we have those paid courses, which are sort of premium courses. There's a foundation one called 101 and a more advanced one called Ads for Authors. But actually, there's a ton of free resources to get you going on that. And our podcast is available on that website as well, selfpublishingformula.com. Should you be interested in my book, jamesblatch.com is the place to find that. To find my sort of author website and The Final Flight by James Blatch on Amazon, if you want to search on that.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast with me. I really appreciate it. It's been very informative. This has been great.
Thank you, Chris. I've really enjoyed it.
That was my conversation with James Blatch, author and co-host of the Self-Publishing Show podcast, which can be found everywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also find James at jamesblatch.com and selfpublishingformula.com. My name is Chris Cookley, and you can find me at whomakesapodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, it would be an enormous help if you shared it with your friends or left a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. It helps other podcast lovers find the show, and it really does make a difference. And if you host a podcast and would like to be my next guest on Who Makes a Podcast, let me know. Go to whomakesapodcast.com/guest and tell me about your show. This is Who Makes a Podcast. I'll be back next time with another conversation with another incredible podcast host. Thanks for listening.